Hi, everybody. Today's February 15th, 2024, and I'm honored to have with me Adam Coleman, the president of Aintblackistan. Did I get it right?
Correct.
I've never visited there, but shortly we will be doing that. Tell us the derivation of that name and your thoughts and interests.
Sure. So Aintblackistan started as like it was a conversation I had with someone online, but it was a bit of a joke. But it stems from Joe Biden's "You Ain't Black."
Yeah.
So I created a fictitious nation of Black people who apparently aren't Black. So
who would know better than Joe Biden? Obviously, right?
Obviously. So it's a nation filled with refugees.
Are you allowing border crossings freely?
Yes, we do have 90-day visas, but we are strict on our border policy. So if we catch you past 90 days, you will be deported.
So tell us what are the cultural mores and habits of the citizens?
In some ways, we're very libertarian, and in other ways, there's a little bit of authoritarian in there. It's a mixed bag. It really depends what it is. We're very strong on our borders, but at the same time, we give people the freedom to be themselves.
Well, I have noticed that. So I've followed you not forever, but in the last couple of weeks, I actually I interviewed your brother Ron.
Yes.
Ron Coleman. This is just a side note, but I play tennis, and we have this round robin. So there's a lot of kind of random people, whoever signs up shows up, and so the other day, well, there's a guy, it's Chinese Randy, and there's me, and I don't know if you can tell, but I'm not as Chinese as Chinese Randy. People are like, "Oh, you're both Randys?" Like, yeah, I just kind of said we're brothers, and people are like, what? Yeah, I said it was kind of weird because our dad name was the same first name. It's kind of odd. Anyway, but in your case, Ron Coleman and you, but so I'm relatively new to all things Adam Coleman, but I did notice some of your interviews, and they've been excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about your interview with is it Chloe Cole? Is that the right?
Yeah.
So how did that go? How did you score the interview? And what's the repercussions? And what's her story? And how does it resonate with your own?
Sure. So we ended up getting together because we're working on a same project, and we happened to be at the same place at the same time in Nashville. And I reached out and asked if she was willing to sit down and have a conversation with me for Breaking Bread. Breaking Bread is a series that kind of sparked from something that I've been doing for quite some time, for a number of years. There's a traveling aspect to it. A lot of the episodes feature me going to different places. So whether it's, I'm in New Jersey, whether it's me going to New York City, or me going to Florida, London, and Nashville, add to the list. So there's a bit of a traveling aspect to it. And, years ago, I started solo traveling and just meeting people from all over the world and talking politics with them. There's a lot of people from different countries who are interested in American politics, and they would have questions for an American, and I just gave my perspective, and I would ask their perspective, and then we would talk about where they're from and their viewpoints. But we typically did this over a meal, and it was always casual in nature, and I never really took any offense if they disagreed or if they had questions. I was very open with them, and we were open with each other. And so when I wanted to start this, I wanted to do something that was casual, good faith, and, something that people felt comfortable doing. So that's why I'm reluctant to say, like, I interviewed Chloe. I just kind of sat down and we just started talking. And actually, the way I filmed it, I have 3 cameras set up. The way I filmed it was us on the couch, on the same couch, just like staring at each other and talking. And initially, I had it set up where she would be on the couch and I would be on a separate chair. But before we started recording, I was just we were just sitting on the couch and talking, waiting for our food to come. And we were having a good conversation before we even started recording. So I was like, this feels very nice and casual, and she looks comfortable. So I moved the cameras around. So honestly, the episode hasn't come out yet. It's probably not coming out for like 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But it's probably the best episode I filmed because it felt so intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And the topics that we were talking about were very personal and eye-opening
Mm-hmm.
from both sides. And then there are moments where we laugh about something, so it's very exploratory. It can go in different angles. What we had in common was when she was a child, the doctors recommended that basically put her on cross-sex hormones, remove her breasts, and they told her parents this is the only way forward. And obviously harming her and putting her health in danger for the rest of her life because of the decisions of so-called experts. And in my circumstance, when I was 6 years old, it was recommended that I go into a mental health institution. And I was there for 3 months. And at the recommendation of experts, that's what they told my mother that they should do immediately. And that experience changed my life forever. My temperament, my willingness to be open, how shy I was, become even more introverted after that. And with Chloe, it was, she told me that she wasn't suicidal before, but she was definitely suicidal afterwards. It just made her life worse. So that's like the commonality, and we discussed it a little bit in the episode, but that was the commonality that we shared, when we were talking about these different experiences.
There's a lot to gain from that. I'll just give 2 quick anecdotes. I'm the father of 2 men, but they were kids once, and so was I 1,000 years ago. But my older son was big for his age, and when he was like 3.5, 4, he was at a school that had kind of different ages in one classroom. So there was kind of a big, broad kindergarten, nursery school, whatever. And the teacher, one of the I don't know, she's an expert or whatever. She came up to me and she said, "Your son needs speech therapy." And I said, I don't think he does. She said, I think his main problem is he's too tall. She kind of looked at me crazy, like I'm a moron. And so she reiterated, she said he kind of can't pronounce certain words. I said, yeah, his problem is basically he's too tall. And she kind of like, what? I said, well, let me ask you a question. How old is he? And she says he's like 5 or 6. I said, no, he's actually 3. He's almost 4. I said, oh my God, he's so tall for his age. Anyway, but it's kind of like, she had not investigated to the actual. He speaks fine for a 3.9-year-old. He doesn't speak that great for a 5-year-old. But people grow into things. And the other one anecdote I'll give is the unfortunate case of a friend of mine, daughter, and they did this mastectomy before she finished puberty, and she's in her own stage, whatever you want to call it now, of the same pathway as Chloe. But I was talking with the mom separately while this was happening, and I was kind of confused because they kept saying they don't want to go for the college interviews, they don't want to do this. That I'm like, I thought your son already went for college interviews. I thought he was already in college. Like, no, she meant the one person they. It was very confusing. Anyway, we got through that, and she said, well, we started doing that because she's so confused, or they are so confused, with puberty. And she said, I gotta say, when I was a kid, she was saying, when I was that age, I was also really like blown away by growing breasts, and I was so I don't know, emotional, whatever. It's like, okay, but you survived it. I mean, I didn't say any of this, but it's like you survived it, and you went on to have marriage and kids. People are confused at various ages, and to to think that this is an impossible kind of Chinese box mystery puzzle that people can't get out of,
Right.
is a sadness. Um, so it looks to me as if you managed to, I'm not saying you don't have necessarily issues. We all have issues, but you seem to be in touch with some of them, and introversion, say. You have an aspect of extroversion in the fact that you can bring some of your thoughts to writing and to the public. How has that been for you? And what are the kind of ongoing challenges that you have in presenting your word to the world?
Um, well, I will say this, before I started doing anything publicly, I did a lot of work on myself. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today. Um, it took a lot of getting comfortable in my own skin, getting over social anxiety, things of that nature. Traveling is a big thing that really, like, tremendously helped with my social anxiety. Especially when you go to a place you've never been before, you don't understand the language, you're kind of thrown into the deep end. Everything is new, and even after my first trip, it was a huge relief, and I didn't realize how big the anxiety aspect was in my life until it was gone. You just kind of get used to it, um, and then especially over time, just building confidence. So, like, I would say since I became public, I've only just gotten stronger. I've only become more confident, more sure of myself, and I felt like also while writing my book for 9 months, I was also mentally preparing myself to become public. So I was saying, worst case scenario, I might get canceled. Worst case scenario, I might lose my job. And I had to be okay with these things. And thankfully, none of that stuff happened. It was the complete opposite. I was embraced. I didn't really lose. I lost a few friends, but they weren't like super close friends. My family overwhelmingly supports me. So I didn't have to experience these things, but I think the mental preparation for it to possibly happen and to be 100% okay with it, so I wasn't blindsided if it did happen, made me stronger beforehand. I think there are times when people like all of a sudden get in the public eye and aren't prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think mentally preparing myself for the worst possible scenario has made me stronger. And then becoming public and then having opportunities come up, like public speaking, I had never done it before. Going on live television, I had never done it before. All of these different things, I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't do all the work beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just becomes getting used to it, developing a skill, developing strategies as far as how to handle being a public face. Even on, like, I'm not like some super famous person, but like you face criticisms. You face people who disagree with you and things like that. How do you handle it? And so far, I think I've been handling it pretty well by just focusing on my mental health and picking and choosing my battles.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think picking and choosing the battles is an interesting point. Even the great boxers, they don't fight every day. The
Right.
NFL, they don't have a game every day. There's a certain bout and all the preparations. If you watch the Super Bowl, or any other game, everyone's kind of swaying. The national anthem's on, or the AKA, the Black national anthem, or such as it is, and people are swaying. They're kind of in their moods and so forth. And there's a lot of anxiety and jumping up and down and all that kind of stuff because they are gladiators and they're in this sphere. So there's
Mhm.
kind of this preparation. My occasional travails are on the tennis or squash courts or something like that, but
Mhm.
I gear myself up. I kind of feel like there's something at stake, and I think it's important that you are able to work out a routine where you can prep for that. But I think over time you'll find, and maybe you have already, that a lot of people don't bite your head off per se.
Mhm.
They appreciate hearing an authentic voice, and that sounds to me as if you have one. There's a little joke: once you can fake authenticity, you've got it made. But I don't think you are, and I think
No.
people want to hear the pathway. And so I kind of come back to first principles here. What is it about Aintblackistan that people want to hear? And obviously you can talk about the derivation of the term, But
Mhm.
why? What is going on that authentic Black voices are at a premium?
Um, I think it's the same thing that's affecting all voices, is that the elite, the most prevalent people who are in our society are dictating the conversation. We have Black leftists who are dictating narratives. We have uh, Black wealthy millionaires who might be in media, who might be just general celebrities, who just repeat leftist narratives as well. They repeat oppression narratives, even though their life is nothing but, privileged. They say that nobody can do things, yet they've been able to accomplish everything they wanted to do, right? And I see a lot of gatekeepers when it comes to that, as far as voices go. But the same problem that it's facing for Black Americans, it's almost as bad. Sorry for my voice. It's almost as bad for everybody else. I think in general, the working class, the average American's voice is being suppressed. Um, they're not being represented within the media. They're not being considered. And when finally someone acknowledges their voice, they're saying, they're gaslighting and saying that's not actually what they care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I sat down, I did an episode with David Marcus, the columnist, and I was talking to him about this very thing. And we were talking about how like the media was finally going out into middle America and talking to people who like Trump, and they said, it sounds like he's finally like listening to our voice. And then in the next breath they would be like, but that's not really the reason why. Right. Like they're telling you that, no, it's because of white supremacy, it's because of they just hate foreigners, it's all this other junk. And so their voices are quickly overshadowed, inserted with some leftist dogma, and no one is actually being heard. So I think for a lot of my articles that I write, I come from a perspective of, this is not what regular people care about, or this is actually what regular people care about. Like, this is nothing but noise, and this doesn't help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't represent most of the Black people that I've ever encountered. They don't actually care about this stuff. This is silly, right? This is privilege. This is privileged Black American bullshit, right? Which coincidentally is privileged American bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same stuff. They just put a black face on it, but it's the same nonsense. Um, I just feel like, as someone who's been poor, who's struggled, who's been through all this stuff, I just feel like there are very few people who say the thing that I'm thinking within our media,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a journalist or whether it's someone who just writes an occasional opinion piece. But it's very, very few people who are just having a common sense viewpoint on any given topic that actually represents what people are thinking, right? It is always from a sense of ideology. And this is somewhat bipartisan. It's coming from a place of ideology and their belief system. And it's not coming from a place of even just some anecdotal evidence or just like personal experience or, something like that. Um, I find that, as someone who didn't go to college, who doesn't have a writing background, yet I'm able to find some success in a field of writing. And people enjoy what I have to say. And it's because I'm actually saying something that people really want to hear and they've been longing to hear. I think there are a lot of people who are tired of being angry, which is why a lot of my articles are very empathetic. They're just tired of the rage bait. They're tired of this stuff. It works for some people. They just want to be angry all the time. I can't help them, right? But I think there are people who just want sensibility. There are people who want feel good. There are people who want like realism, something authentic. And I'm not trying to be anything other than myself when I write my articles. This is truly how I see things and truly how I believe. I talk about my faults. I talk about things that I'm proud of. I talk about things that I'm really optimistic for. I talk about these things because this is generally how people talk. But our media environment is so nihilistic, and that's a bipartisan feature. But it seems to be especially nihilistic on the political right, and so I stand out because I'm not that way.
Andrew Clavin, I think channeling C.S. Lewis said, anger is the devil's cocaine.
Mm.
And, I think there is a high from it, kind of this, caffeine-ish, urging and so forth, and people kind of, move into battle. Classically, heroin was named, it was a drug made in Germany in the 19 teens, I believe. And it was named that because it gave soldiers a heroic feeling. So it's actually, heroin is literally just like, hero and heroine, male and female. And so they call it heroin because it kind of gave people a different feeling of themselves. They were beyond themselves. They were, super people. And, doing that very much obviously has its own addiction and its own, depravity and debasement and so forth. When people become kind of following these heroic, say, false drugs, in the case of literally heroin, or other drugs such as anger, I think they fall by the wayside in figuring out the right way for the most people. And it becomes a little bit more about how they can get their own redose of that feeling they have. And power is another drug, obviously. So, let's change hats a little bit. Let's say, you got more power and more voice. How would you change certain things in society currently outside your own personal sphere?
More power, as in, like, can you give me an example? Like, if I just became more known or something like that, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different spheres. I mean, there's the culture,
Mhm.
there's movies. I recently saw American Fiction, which I think was one of the better movies I've seen in a little bit. It's kind of, dealing with certain of the themes you're mentioning. Kind of like, what are the voices? What are the voices that are get promoted because they help keep the power structure, or keep certain people getting their own anger slash power drug.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I guess on a, if suddenly you were the president of a, state, a county of Aintblackistan and so forth, how would things change?
I would have a purposeful campaign to restore optimism. I think that is something is, and I think sometimes, and this comes from, like, the pessimist, they think that being optimistic means, like, blind to reality, right? That you're just ignoring all the bad stuff. No, that's not. Like, we could talk about the bad stuff. We always talk about the bad stuff. But what I'm saying is, optimism is optimistic that the bad stuff will get better, right? And it's trying to find a way for that to actually happen. And I think there are many ways for the bad things that we complain about to actually get better. But I think that, I'll give you an example. 9/11 was the most patriotic time that I've ever seen in my life. It was like there was a campaign to restore from this terrible, tragic event that we all watched on television, and to bring back American pride, right? And we rallied together, and we grew stronger as a nation. We sold out on American flags. Like, there was a campaign of the terrorists will not win, right? It's that kind of restore of a nation. It's optimistic that the terrorists will not win. We will fight back. We will get stronger as a nation, and we will do this together. I think we need some of that, right? And granted, I don't think we should have a terrorist event for it to happen. But I think that we need to have more of that. We need to have yes, this is bad, but we can fix this, and we will get better, and we will get stronger. And it is possible to do so. And what I hear far too often is, things are bad, it will never get better, our society is crumbling and it will never mend itself. And I just don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, it can be that if you never want to fix it, right? You can't fix something if you don't believe you can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the first thing we have to do is retrain our mentality. Right. So I think that's why like partisanship is poison in politics, right? Believing that the other person on the other side can't come anywhere close to wanting the same thing that you want. And so you just don't refuse to work together. And what I'm trying to show with like breaking bread is that you can sit across from someone who clearly is on the other party or from a different political spectrum, and they have like a different path, but you realize that they want the same outcome as you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I have an episode that's coming out in like a week or two. I sat down with a Democrat strategist. I'm not a Democrat anymore. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. I have some right-leaning viewpoints, but I'm sitting there talking to her, and we talked for about an hour and a half. I never said I disagreed because we found areas that we agreed, and we got closer, and I understood where she was coming from. And there might have been things like how she was saying something that I wouldn't say it like that, but she's her own person. And at the end of the day, I agreed with her stance, and that's what was more important. And I think there needs to be more of that. It sounds cliche, we need the aisle and stuff like that, but I think it is possible to do so, but it's impossible to do so if you think that the other side wholly agrees with the most heinous part of that political spectrum, right? So if you're a Democrat, you couldn't imagine working with Republicans if you think that they're the most extreme version of a Republican, every single one of them. And it's like, no, those guys exist. There are racists who are on the right. Those guys exist, but it is not the majority, not anywhere close. These guys are the fringe, right? And you should be able to differentiate. Same thing on the left. Not every Democrat wants to mutilate children and believes in this stuff, right? Because I know plenty of Democrats who do not like this stuff, right? It is a fringe concept and it's seeping its way into politics. And these fringe actors are taking over the party, which is one of the reasons why I left the Democrat Party. But there is commonality. There are things that we can do to kind of work together.
Well, I think that on a micro level, we have friends. We live in a Boston suburb and lived in Boston before that, and so it's a very left-leaning place. So far, left-leaning, sometimes people fall over. But it just, and in conversation you can do that. At the dinner table you can do that, and we have loads of kind of dinner groupings and parties and whatnot. But I think there is the converse, which is that while I like to have freedom of speech, Elon Musk was bringing this up, I think, today. There's not always freedom of reach, and the left, as it were, or the party in power, sometimes is there, and they pull the ladder up. So they're there. There was a lot of, and there still is a fair amount of shadow banning, and aspects of not letting other voices come out. I think debate is really the incubus of any type of value change. Science is basically debate. One person says this one, and you have to experiment. But if you don't have the debate in front of you, you can't possibly garner or gain any further points in progress. And when debate gets taken away, that's an issue. And so it tends to be that the left, even the well-meaning left, is willing to put up with certain things that take away debate. There aren't really, I think on the right, if somebody is found out to be heinous in one way or another, they are expelled and expunged from the party. But on the left, that doesn't seem to happen very much. I think you can be, the so-called quote unquote anti-racist, i.e. racist, on the left, and say all kinds of things that would, if you flip the color scheme of the comments, would be, obviously, white supremacist kind of stuff, except it's put in the guise of other races, and you can say those
Mhm.
things about whites. You can say things about white trash and all kind of stuff. And so those voices don't get expelled to the same degree. But there's also this kind of cutoff of debate, and the aspect wherein, things where we would have the ultimate playing out of our debate in elections. One party wants voter ID, so the actual people of our commonwealth and of our state, and states general, would be able to be acknowledged for their votes. There's no greater debate than an election. And if you hold
Mhm.
an election and where people aren't, one by one accounted for, and there's not a one-to-one identity function between those who can vote and those who do vote, and those who do vote are the ones who can vote, then you are, in a sense, negating debate.
Right.
And so I think there's two different fora types. There's those where you get strikes and communities. I've had like 3 different YouTube channels taken down, and I personally don't think I ever say anything in a conspiracy way. I try to only work in facts for my science stuff and COVID and whatnot. But we saw during COVID, if you said the virus leaked from Wuhan, you were taken down, and now
Mhm.
you can say it. So for what happened? Well, the debate eventually occurred, but it occurred like 3 years too late. And
Right.
so I find that, but I appreciate that you are doing that. And I think Breaking Bread is a great title. Obviously, it recalls Breaking Bad, which I never really thought about as Breaking Bread, but I think Breaking Bread maybe was a derivation of Breaking Bad title. But I think it's a really interesting antidote for Breaking Bad, that you're breaking good in a sense by
Mhm.
breaking bread. So I appreciate that. So what are the kind of foundational aspects? You're welcome to touch on anything I mentioned just now, but kind of what are the foundational aspects by which you keep your lodestar, your magnetic north, pointing in the right direction? I'm just going to bring up one little anecdote. I was reading recently that back in the days of Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, they knew a lot of stuff, but Aristotle literally thought people thought with their hearts, that he didn't understand the brain. He thought the brain was just kind of a repository to keep
Mhm.
the eyeballs working or whatever. Um, but people thought with their heart. And I think today people almost think that people think with their skin, that you are thinking according to certain facial or melanin characteristics, or ethnic whatever that you have, and that's the way people think. And if you don't think a certain way, then you are not part of that group. It's kind of like the Clarence Thomas, Uncle Tom um,
Right.
uh, epithet. Anyway, and you're welcome to dissect anything there, but basic question is, how do you keep your magnetic north? How do you keep pointing in the right direction? And where did you get your sense?
I've always been, even from being a little kid, I've always been pretty analytical. As far as things, if I'm introduced something, I'm very like, I examine it. Um, which is no surprise why I got into the IT field. Um, troubleshooting, figuring things out, understanding how something works, and trying to analyze like why it's broken, and then backtracking. You know, if you know how it works, you can figure out how to fix it. So that I kind of just use the same mindset when it comes to politics and culture. If I know how it works and I see what's broken, then I should be able to figure out how to fix it. Right. And so I think I spend a lot of time not talking and just reading, um, not necessarily books, but reading what people are saying. I kind of agree that, humans are very emotional, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The right tries to make it a bad thing, but that's just what we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so because we're emotional, you have to tap into that emotion. Right. So whether it's anger, whether it's empathy, um, you have to tap into it to get people to move in a particular way, to get them to react. People who make propaganda understand this, right? So you have to tap into some sort of sensibility of human beings and make them emotionally driven. It's hard to get people to move by just showing them numbers,
Mm-hmm.
right? That doesn't really do it. You get them to move by telling them stories,
Mm-hmm.
and storytelling is like it's something that we've always done. Human beings have always told stories. The Bible is filled with stories for a reason, right? It touches people, and then when someone's going through something, they can refer to a Bible story that had a lesson at the end. So it kind of inspires you to do something different. Like, they experienced the same thing back in this story. And this is why you should do this, XYZ, whatever it might be. And so that's why I tell a lot of stories, and I tell personal stories, because like my number one issue is advocating for the nuclear family. It's for protecting children. And so when I'm talking about single parenthood as being a failing measure for children, I talk about my childhood growing up without my father. And so I'm open enough to talk about these things. And I'm doing it for a reason, because I understand these stories, even if it's anecdotal, these stories are what move people. Now, I have numbers to back up what I'm saying, and we already know we already know like the success rate of children who grow up in two-parent homes versus a single-parent home, right? So the evidence is already out there, yet that doesn't move the needle, right? And it's because we don't have enough people who are willing to tell the story. We don't have enough children who grow up in that environment who are willing to criticize how they were raised, because it comes off as them either being A, ungrateful, or B, going after their mother. And so we have to risk these things when not many people are willing to risk these things. And so for me, I was willing to tell my story at the risk of it sounding like I'm going after my mother, but it's not. I'm not trying to go after my mother. And I do everything possible to say that my mother isn't perfect. I love my mother, but I'm not perfect either. None of us are perfect. So like within my book, I criticize myself, my father, my mother. I criticize everybody because I actually care. And I think we've lost that willingness to criticize people that we care about as well.
I think that is a form of love.
Right.
You don't want to argue all the time. I have the handcuff of love right here, and we celebrate, Valentine's Day, where you theoretically you're shot by an arrow right in your heart, which is kind of a funny, gruesome way of looking at love, because obviously you did get shot in the heart with an arrow, you die. But in a sense, there's kind of the rebirth. You come out different, and it's an irony. My wife and I, we were dating for a while, and for a number of years, as a matter of fact. And one of my regrets after the fact is that I didn't, ask the question earlier. I didn't solidify the relationship and marry. And young people, I'm actually going to officiate a wedding in a couple months, but a lot of young people, are skittish about getting married. Both from the left and the right. There was an article recently, I think it's in the Free Press, about marriage being attacked on the left and the right. There's like Andrew Tate, and he mentioned somebody else, a woman, who are both denigrating marriage from the right, as it were. I'm not sure Andrew Tate is on the right in any way, but that's the way this author characterized him. And on the left, it's been that way for a while. That marriage doesn't count. So marriage was the bedrock of society, and it's really it is society. That is the family is that from out which everything else blossoms. And if you don't have the family and the upbringing and the way of looking at yourself and knowing who you are, I think you're at a kind of a few yards back at the starting line, and it's difficult to run the race. And we see this over and over again. Just as an odd example, Steph Curry is an amazing basketball player, but his being that. You see him pictures at 2 years old and 4 years old with his dad and his brother. It's always with the basketball. Tiger Woods became an incredible golfer. He was starting at a young age. I'm not saying that's the way people should be groomed, getting their career paths at 3 or 4. But you can see the imprinting that's happening, and that's from a dad, generally speaking. Like, the LaMelo Ball and has LeVon Ball and Lamar, whatever. There's Lamar. I can't remember all the balls. D'Angelo, whatever. Leangelo. Anyway, there's a bunch of balls, and I'm not saying he's the best dad either, but there's kind of this force of personality the dad brings that kind of gets the kids going and motivated. And I loved my dad, and he left far too early. He passed, he died when I was 20 or so. But the fact of the matter is, not having, I can't imagine, not having had him there. Although he, was hardworking, we didn't see him all the time. We don't go. Dads and moms are different. Mom's
Right.
kind of like the everyday person, but the dad's there as a model of what you can do and what you accomplish, and you wind up, templating. And I think that's a difficult thing. I know you have a son. I believe you have a son, correct?
Correct.
Once I did pop the question, the whole relationship changed. It became a much more kind of, it's almost like the difference between renting a house or staying in a hotel and owning a house. If you take on the task becomes completely different. If something's broken in that house, you have to fix it. You're renting or you're in a hotel. It's like, you complain, you move on. And I think, so much of what people have for relationships is like motel stays and maybe even by the hour. And it's kind of concept where you have ownership of what you do, good and bad, it really helps you grow, and it kind of brings a different level of the relationship. So, I think that, I have not read your book, but I think if you can bring that kind of message out, you can help people by the multitudes who've been kind of somewhat polluted by Andrew Tate and the like.
Yeah. The analogy you use as far as like hotel versus like buying a house, I think that's a really good analogy. And so I'm married now. We've been married a little bit over 2 years now. So marriage is still new to me. I've never been married before. And I can understand that. And that's kind of like, I've said that marriage is important because it puts skin in the game, especially for men. And so, yes, can people get divorced? Yes. Right. But it's a major hurdle to do so, even though people do it. So there's a reluctance to get divorced. And there is to me, marriage, everything is purposeful, right? You purposefully planned the wedding. You purposefully asked. Everything is very purposeful. It's intentional that you wanted this situation. So to me, in most situations, there's a basis of love that exists there. You wanted to get married for a particular reason. Whereas if you have a girlfriend, you just you like the same stuff, and then you just kind of roll into whatever it is. And, and if they piss you off for a month, you're like, I'm done with this, and you just kind of move on. There's no skin in the game. It's just whatever. You just kind of do your own thing. And I think it's that mixture of laissez-faire, I'll just move on to something else. That's one thing. But then when you bring children into the mix, and you just kind of disregard the person that you're with, even though you have a child, I think we're too focused on the how I'm feeling versus how this affects our children. And I want to talk about that more often, because oftentimes when we look at children who grow up in single parent homes, we look at the outcome and say, on the surface, they look fine. Adam has a job and Adam's doing okay, but they don't see the journey to get there. And they completely overshadow the ones who don't make it, right? Which are a lot of them. Whenever I write about stuff like this in the public, especially for the New York Post, I get emails from people who work in prisons, juvenile homes, some sort of corrections, and they all say the same stuff. I worked at the juvenile home, and there was only one kid that came from a 2-parent home.
Right.
The rest of them grew up in single-parent homes, were foster kids, and they were just thrown around in the system.
Tricky. It's tricky. I think there's a big loss. I did in my medical practice. I had a regular general medical practice, but for about 8 years, I did narcotic detox, outpatient, a slow, gradual 4-month process. And my cohort, the patients I saw, it's like that syllogism. Not all Muslims are terrorists, but all the terrorists were Muslims. It's not that everybody from a single parent household turns out on narcotics, but almost all the ones on narcotics were from that cluster and whatnot. So I think there's, especially for boys/men, I think there's a huge gap. Girls growing up in a single family household, they have the templating going on. They can see what a mom is, what a woman is. And the guys, they wind up going out to gangs and whatnot, unless they can kind of, straighten their lives out. The example I like to use, in the converse is LeBron James. whose dad, I mean, as wealthy as he is, billionaire plus, nobody's come forward and said, I am LeBron's dad. You'd think there'd be like the enticement, at least of a little, a 1% of what he has would make you like set for life. And nobody's come forward. So you can see the degree with which, his mom, was having dalliances, whatever you want to call it. And so he was not only dadless, but he's almost like, minus on that, score. And he was adopted by a policeman, if I'm not mistaken. Or anyway, he was a kind of a stern guy, and he also coached football, I believe. And I think LeBron got, a lot of LeBron's, fortitude through that relationship, and he left his mom's household, and he grew up in a household with a mom and a dad, and they weren't his. But I think that's really important, that's his templating aspect. So I think people, I think you can kind of extrapolate from being a dad and being kind of a father to certain ideas, and I respect that. We're kind of rounding out our quarter hour because we don't quite have a full hour today. But I'd love to have you back on to continue the conversation. But any final parting words before I show people your book?
No, I would just like to add to what you said. The way I kind of see it is you increase the likeliness of those things happening, right? So it is not a guarantee, like you said, that they become drug addicts, they end up in prison or anything like that. Obviously, there are lots of people who grow up in single parent homes who are not in that position, regardless of race. However, you increase the likeliness of this happening by growing up in this situation. Just like smoking doesn't guarantee you get lung cancer, but smoking increases the likeliness of you getting lung cancer.
Right. So I'm going to show people your book here. So I have a friend named Victor who I golf with. Maybe he'll buy this. Black Victim to Black Victor. And people can find it on Amazon. And you also have a page on Twitter, if I can find it here. So Adam Coleman, president of Aintblackistan. We never really thanked Joe Biden for naming your site, but we can do that now. And I recommend people follow you also on your Speaking Wrong at the Right Time. And that's your Substack. And just as a note of kind of personal personal promotion, like people take a look. If they want to help support my podcast here, they can buy my book, totally different topic. It's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. If people remember Brazil, 2015, 16, the U.S. Had some scare with this as well. We have some tropical parts of the U.S., and we spent $1 billion kind of drive the engine to fix this problem, but it turns out the science was never really there in the first place. That's why it's never occurred, and kind of people don't hear about it anymore. This is a great kind of Sherlock Holmes attempt at understanding science, as it were. So I recommend people buy it, and even better if they read it. And if they read it, they review it, and ditto for your book. So thank you so much, Adam, for being with us today. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll be able to chat again.
Thank you so much for having me.